We are back on the spin room. The diplomatic world did not see this one coming. Donald Trump's ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, shocked the administration with her announcement on resigning this week. To discuss this and the Trump administration's Mideast policy, I'm very happy to be joined from Ottawa, Illinois, by a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on the spin room. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I want to start with, of course, with Nikki Haley. Everyone seems to be scratching their heads with this one, why this rock star would leave the Trump administration with just less than 3 weeks before the midterms. What do you make of this somewhat unusual timing?
It is unusual, and you know, I was shocked as much as anybody to wake up and hear that she's resigning. I don't think there's really anything more to this, though, than exactly what they said. You saw in the Oval Office meeting between Nikki Haley and the president, there's definitely affection between the two of them. They respect each other. You know, she could often say if she disagreed with the president, and he would take that disagreement and take it to heart and make decisions. But I think it's literally, if you look at Nikki Haley's service, she has kids that are, I think one's in college, one's getting ready to go in college. She's, you know, served as governor, then as the UN ambassador. And I think it's just a matter of, you know, a lot of people in an administration do about 2 years, then they move on. And so that's, I think, what this case is, and we'll have to see ultimately. But I don't think there's anything more than she needs a bit of a break and, you know, get a new UN ambassador in there with some new ideas.
Okay, let me ask you this. Who would you like to see fill her seat?
Who would I say that again? Who would I like to see?
See her fill that position.
Oh, so there's a lot of great people out there, and you know, I think any one of them. The president's talked about kind of a short list of 5 people. I know a few of them on it, and I think they'd all be good. Rich Grenell, the German ambassador, would be great. And so there's a lot of good people, but whoever it is, I think will take the message of the president to the UN, which is we need a UN that's fair and doesn't spend all its time going after Israel and not people like Bashar al-Assad or Vladimir Putin.
All right, let's talk about Israel and talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The long-awaited U.S. peace plan is yet to be revealed. The Palestinians themselves are skeptical that a plan will ever be released. The chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat, said, I don't think they will ever introduce a plan. The whole world is rejecting their ideas. They are already implementing their plan by changing the terms of reference. And also the Special Mideast Envoy, Jason Greenblatt, has said, you know, the U.S. administration has tried hard to be fair to the Palestinians. Let me ask you this, Congressman. With the embassy move to Jerusalem and the fund cuts of millions of dollars to Palestinians, has the Trump administration really been as fair to Palestinians as it has been to Israel so far?
Well, maybe not. But, you know, it comes down to a couple of things. And so if you talk about fair, first off, Congress has made it law decades ago that the American embassy should be in Jerusalem. And President Trump, to his credit, is the only president that said, we're going to actually do it. And, you know, you heard people that said, well, once you do that, it's going to be the end of the Middle East. It's going to be World War III. All these predictions. Hasn't been the case. You know, when it comes to the Palestinians and aid, we want to make sure there's humanitarian aid there. But when it comes down to it, the Palestinian people and their leadership have to recognize, first and foremost, Israel's right to exist as a state and as a nation. And failure to do that makes it really difficult to negotiate on any behalf. So when it comes down to negotiation, I'm not overly optimistic. This has been, you know, I'm 40 years old, and since I've been paying attention to international politics, this has been a goal of every administration, and it's fallen short. I would love them to come to some kind of a peace plan, but when it comes down to it, our ally Israel needs defended. Our ally Israel is one of the only and the best democracy in the Middle East. And to say that, you know, the Palestinians can enter good faith negotiations without recognizing the fact that Israel has a right to exist is a very tough position to start with. And so I think coming at this from a strong position of saying, look, we're going to negotiate from a position of strength and not from weakness, like I think the prior administration did, would be a positive thing.
Well, what do you think the U.S. could be doing now to get both parties back to the table, specifically the Palestinians? Is there something that the U.S. could do to bring Palestinians to the table and stop them avoiding the Trump administration?
Yeah, you know, if I had that answer, I'd probably be over there negotiating the solution. So I don't really know. And, you know, I think when it comes down to it, you have to ask the Palestinian people. Do you want peace, or do you want to live in a constant state of conflict? Do you want peace with your neighbor Israel? Do you want to be able, I mean, you know, the times I've been to Jerusalem, I've been amazed that as you walk around the city, you see Christians, you see Jews, you see Muslims, you see people of all faith walking around and getting along. And that's what the greater area could be. But again, the Palestinians have to recognize the fact that Israel has a right to exist and be there. So I don't have the magic solution. I wish I did. But I think ultimately it's going to take the Palestinians also coming to the table and saying, we're kind of tired of this, and it's really robbing every generation of Palestinians of opportunity.
Okay, I want to move on to Syria and Iranian presence in that country. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said the following on the Iranian presence in Syria. Let's have a listen.
The onus for expelling Iran from the country falls on the Syrian government, which bears responsibility for its presence there. We've been clear. If Syria doesn't ensure the total withdrawal of Iranian-backed troops, it will not receive $1 single from the United States for reconstruction.
Congressman, what would you say about that statement from Mike Pompeo? I mean, if the U.S. Doesn't fund Syria's reconstruction, doesn't that just pave the way for Russia and a larger Iranian presence in Syria to fill that vacuum?
It's quite possible, but at the same time, if we fund the reconstruction of Syria while the Syrian regime is continuing to murder its people, continuing to hide the presence of chemical weapons, continuing to invite the Russians on its territory, continuing to use the Iranian regime as a way to defend itself and allow the Iranians to continue to fund and send weapons to their allies around Israel, that's only going to embolden Syria. So, you know, on situations of international policy like this, there's never any clean solution. We have a very deep heart for the Syrian people. America has given a lot to help the Syrian people, as well as its neighbors have done the same too. But to reconstruct a nation under a barbaric regime that hosts one of the greatest sponsors of terrorism in the world would be the wrong answer. I think the president and the secretary are right in this, which is, look, if Syria wants a peaceful future, quit killing your people, quit gassing your children, and kick Iran out of your country. We'll see if that happens, but I'll tell you, I think Iran's in a lot deeper than they ever imagined they would be, and I think to that case the Russians are as well.
How do you want to kick Iran out of the country?
Well, look, it's going to have to ultimately be a couple of things. It's going to have to be the Syrians disinviting Iran. It's going to be Iran feeling pressure and understanding that the cost of being in Syria far exceeds any benefit. It's going to be the Russians playing a role in that, as much as I hate to say it, because I'm not a big fan of Vladimir Putin. And it's also going to take the domestic audience of Iran. I mean, they've stood up constantly and said, you know, we got all this basically windfall of money from the Iran deal, and we're not seeing new roads and bridges or better schools or better opportunity. We're seeing more and more wars that we're losing, which I think I would argue that they actually are losing in Syria. And I think Israel has to continue to be tough, as it will, and defend itself against encroachment. And we also need to keep our base in Al Tanf, which straddles the main highway, main resupply route that Iran could use to fund its enemies or to supply its enemies around Israel.
Okay, before we go for our commercial break, I want to talk quickly about the fundamental policy differences between Europe and the United States on Iran, because the EU is actively working against U.S. policy, trying to set up an alternative payment mechanism that would circumvent the U.S. sanctions on Iran. What's your message to European leaders on Iran?
Well, it's pick. I mean, you got to pick sides. Ultimately, you may not like what we've done in Iran, but you know what? That's the benefit of having the most powerful country in the world and the most powerful military in the world, is sometimes we get unfair say into what the future of Iran looks like. And if you're in Europe, if you're in Germany, if you're in France or anywhere else, and you're a company that's decided that Iran somehow is your future, which I think would be a bad decision, now you have a choice. You can choose the United States of America, or you can choose Iran. And I really believe that we can have a deal with Iran, but it's going to be a deal that doesn't just have a 10-year freeze on nuclear weapon development. It's going to make it much longer than that, and also say you got to moderate your behavior in the region. Right. Again, it's the benefit of being the United States of America, and we're recognizing that.
Okay. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Stick around. We are back on the spin room with Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Congressman, I would like to talk now about the disappearance of the Saudi dissident and journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The international community is concerned that there's no robust response from the United States. The president was initially very mum, later saying that he's reluctant to cut off arms sales to the Saudis if indeed they are found responsible for Khashoggi's death. Do you feel the United States is standing up to the Saudis strongly enough on this issue, on human rights violations, on the war in Yemen?
Well, no. I mean, I think we need to bring it to the attention more. But look, international politics is not, sometimes it's messy. Sometimes you have to be friends and allies with people you don't love, and you don't love their internal practices. I condemn this situation, and it does appear as if this journalist was murdered in the Saudi consulate, and that would be a huge problem. And I want to make sure we know for sure, but all signs so far that we're seeing is pointing to that's happening, and there needs to be consequences to the Saudis for that. Now, keep in mind, there are a lot of other countries, including some that are allies of us, that imprison journalists as well. Just look at Turkey, for instance. So there needs to be consequences. I do make a difference, though, when it comes to some of these senators that have always had it out for the Saudis that you're hearing from that are saying now is the opportunity to cut off all relations with Saudi Arabia, to ban all arms sales, et cetera, et cetera. That is an extreme position to this. So there needs to be consequences. Maybe those are, you know, some kind of a penalty on the military side, economic on some level, or whatever it ends up being. But we need to be very careful before we just cut off a relationship with Saudi Arabia and basically find ourselves with no allies in the Middle East. And so it's going to be very cautious. Mike Pence has been very aggressive at the beginning on this. The president yesterday said that he has a lot of concern about it, but also expressed some concern with the idea of we're just in essence going to ban all sales of arms to Saudi Arabia and cut off all relations.
So it did take a few days for them to respond. I mean, you mentioned senators before. There's a bipartisan group of senators who are calling for an investigation into this. If, for example, there was a bipartisan group of congressmen in the House, would you join that call for an investigation?
It depends. I mean, I want it investigated. I think we're going to find out what happens before there's any opportunity for some congressional legislation or something like that. The problem is sometimes people coach something as a call for an investigation, but then there's penalties and everything, and that's something that I think really belongs. It's the kind of the difference of our system versus like a parliamentary system, where a lot of the foreign policy really belongs in the decision-making of the President of the United States. And I said that, frankly, under President Obama and gave him a lot of leverage and leeway on that. So we need to watch out when we talk about bipartisan groups of senators. You do have people like Rand Paul who, you know, just desires to get the United States out of everywhere in the world. But I definitely think we need some answers to this. And I just think we need to be careful to say, if we find out this is the automatic response, because this is a very kind of delicate situation.
Very delicate situation. Okay, Congressman, thank you very much for coming onto the Spin Room today on I-24 News. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you, sir.